This stuff's close to home, and it's a very interesting journey as a middle-aged man myself, getting diagnosed 2 years ago and looking in the mirror and going, huh, that's daddy too.
So I have a middle-aged son now who is autistic, and so that's what's sort of my background's education, but that's what started my connection to autism a long time ago.
Right, there's always a
Yeah.
why, isn't there? You've got two types of awareness, right? You've got awareness for non-autistic people that can go, oh, okay, that's great because I can now be more, inclusive and aware of that. And I feel like there's also the self-awareness. We're thinking, okay, possibly autism, possibly ADHD. We're currently doing the diagnostic process, about to get the results soon. Cost us $3,500.
In terms of talking about the fact that autism isn't a disability, we need to be very sensitive.
So then, amongst all these challenges, if you could wave your magic wand and I'm going to put you on the spot here, you have to fix one thing, right? One thing only.
Okay. Yeah.
Here's the soundbite. What would that be, one systemic issue for autism-specific support and the ecosystem, that exists or needs to exist? Welcome to the Steadway NDIS podcast. My name is Chris Hall, your host, and today I'm honoured to have Jackie Borlandon, who is the CEO of Aspect. And for those of you that don't know, Aspect is one of Australia's largest autism-specific service providers, and it spans services but also education. And Jackie's got a very fascinating background with 25 years across various levels of leadership. And today we're going to talk about what Aspect does, what does supporting people that are autistic mean, and just what lies ahead for the broader community and industry of NDIS providers. So Jackie, welcome to the podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, listen, I'm neurospicy myself. I'm autistic, and my son is also on the scheme and is autistic too. So, this stuff's close to home, and it's a very interesting journey as a middle-aged man myself, getting diagnosed 2 years ago and looking in the mirror and going, huh, that's daddy too. So I truly get the journey myself, and it's really interesting as an NDIS provider to also support clients of ours that are neurodivergent in various forms. And so this, it's real. It's a real conversation for us as a company and also individually. So it means a lot to have this conversation.
Okay. And I have a middle-aged son now who is autistic, and so that's what's sort of my background's education, but that's what started my connection to autism a long time ago. And a lot of things have changed in that time, and interested in where our conversation goes.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing that, because often there's a personal connection of some kind, right? There's always a why, isn't there?
Yeah.
So if we think about, what Aspect does, the purpose of the organization is a different brilliance, right? That's one of the phrases that you guys use, I believe. Now that recognizes strengths, aspirations of autistic people. And of course, there are the challenges, and it's called a spectrum for a reason. Like, I'm quite hyperverbal and I've got my challenges, but, it expresses itself so individualistically. So with that motto, so to speak, how do you bring those ideas to life across such a large and diverse organization?
So a different brilliance been our purpose for over 10 years now, and it actually absolutely lives and breathes as the DNA inside Aspect, and across all of the services and supports that we provide, and really recognising, as you say, there's such a huge diversity of autistic people and their support needs. But I think underpinning our purpose is that it doesn't matter who you're working with or what you're doing, coming from a strength-based approach, starting with strengths it's the best way. We all do best when people, start with what we are interested in, what we want to do. That's how we get the best out of people. And so it absolutely lives and breathes in the individual programs that we provide based on their strengths, their interests, their motivations, to just sort of help design what programs and what supports, the way that we present materials to them. And then within our NDIS services as well, we work with our participants on their individual goals, coming from what their interests and their strengths and their motivations are. We also use it across all of our awareness and our awareness campaigns. Our fundraising campaigns are very much from that approach as well. So it's really, about that change, which I have absolutely seen over 25 or more years working in autism sector, from that deficit approach about what autistic people can't do, to coming from that strength-based approach.
Absolutely, and I love that. And it just relating to my own personal journey here, I kind of feel like I finally now in my early 40s landed on my feet, in the sense of like I've always had a passion for strategy, business, empowering people. And then all of a sudden, I was a business coach in the NDIS and I set up a provider business. And I went, oh my goodness, this is my sweet spot. Like it's meaningful because I get to have a positive impact on people's lives, get to express all the geeky IT and strategy things that I love doing too. Yeah, and then yeah, sure, amongst that, I know my strengths. Like I worked 10 hours straight yesterday just hyper focusing, and I was knackered by the evening. But I know that the cost of that as well. So I think that the reason I bring up that is the self-awareness thing. Like awareness, you've got two types of awareness, right? You've got awareness for non-autistic people that can go, oh, okay, that's great because I can now be more, inclusive and aware of that. And I feel like there's also the self-awareness piece. So this is something that I just personally am continuously discovering. I married an empath for a reason because she helps me understand how I'm my own feelings and things like that. And I guess I'm rabbiting on about this because I feel like for the individual, one way or another, self-awareness of, as you say, strengths-based stuff, and then also, well, what do you need and what doesn't work for you? So, like for example,
Mm.
my dogs do my absolute bloody head in when I walk in the door and they're barking, and that's a complete overwhelm for me. That those are real life examples. So, like, could we maybe unpack that a little bit more at the individual level, like the self-awareness thing and how that empowers individuals?
So absolutely, and an education, understanding, coming from the individual's perspective,
Mm.
and not designing a service or designing a program and expecting people to fit into it. That's the old sort of experience of autistic people, was often, a square peg in a round hole, being forced to do things. So, I think the more that we can explore and help autistic children from a young age, if we can, or working with families with young children, to really identify what is it, even for children who aren't using language to communicate. There's communication that really tells you what they're interested in and what they're good at. We all have relativity in terms of some things we're pretty good at and some things we're not so good at. So really, helping parents or helping people to identify those things so that we can build on those things. And then that in turn helps to build awareness, helps to build confidence or self-esteem, and then building on that. I think that's sort of how we approach things.
Yeah, love it. What are your, obviously, Aspect is a huge organization and a leading one in Australia. What are your thoughts and feelings as an organization about the Thriving Kids program?
So we have a position on Thriving Kids, and actually, look, I think we have seen over since the NDIS came into existence, that in fact there has been a gradual decrease in the sorts of supports that those foundational supports, the supports in the community. And in a way, we know that in order to get the NDIS across the line, states and territories were promised that they would be able to save money on other supports. And so the NDIS has become that one place. And so parents who have a young child, absolutely the way to get support, they have to get an NDIS package, and then they have to go and be a case manager and find therapists. And what's missing is that support for families when their children are first identified as having a developmental delay. Yep. And so we see that the opportunity through Thriving Kids is to put some of that back into the ecosystem, so that the NDIS is not the only way to get support if you have a child with a developmental delay or autism.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's so crucial. Like we have our hypotheses about my own daughter. You know, we're thinking, okay, possibly autism, possibly ADHD. We're currentently doing the diagnostic process, about to get the results soon. Cost us $3,500, right? You know, that is, it's such a economic barrier, never mind emotional barrier and knowledge barrier for so many parents. You know, it can be a journey just to even embrace the idea that one's kid might have. You know, but I think if Thriving Kids can actually genuinely address that initial stage of trying to understand diagnostic status, that will be a breakthrough. So I think that's a really crucial point, isn't it? The starting point of the whole journey.
Look, I want to acknowledge there's a lot of concern in the community about Thriving Kids, and we're very, we acknowledge that as well. That we absolutely need to see that it doesn't mean that people will be diverted off the NDIS who should be getting individual supports. So we advocate that Thriving Kids is an addition to the ecosystem. It's not something that takes away supports from people who need them. We understand that potentially the way Thriving Kids has been announced and how fast it's been sort of developed, and the fact that there's, with every conversation about Thriving Kids comes a conversation about sustainability of the NDIS, which is unfortunate. But Thriving Kids and foundational supports we see absolutely should be in their local community. Early childhood play groups, and so supports that help families to be included, absolutely essential for that. So yeah, that's what we hope is going to come through in Thriving Kids.
Nice. If you think about like strategic transformation and the way the whole sector is evolving, if you think about what's happening both inside of Aspect and also outside of Aspect, apart from Thriving Kids, what are the most exciting innovations that you're seeing right now?
I think one of the things that's changed over my years of being involved in services and autism is as well as understanding that we need to support individuals, to develop skills or support them to, with potentially therapies or, supports. Yeah. There's actually as much to be done in the community, and there's as much to be done in terms of inclusion, in terms of making communities inclusive. And that's the really exciting work that Aspect is doing more and more. So we continue to, we've got our schools and our education and our therapy and NDIS services. So we're working with individuals, we're working with families, but as well, we're doing this work now to support communities. So things like, transport, airports, trains, railways, all of that, as well as museums and zoos, retail, and now sort of moving into sort of mainstream health areas. And that's really about working to help the community and the mainstream and society be more inclusive for it's really for autistic people, but then the flow on is that it's more inclusive for everyone. So that's really important work, and it starts with co-design. So it starts with autistic people, so that work we do is absolutely founded in a team that we have of autistic people who do that work, start that work for us. It's really autistic people and their families want to have access to all of the things that everyone has access to, and the more we can work on that, the better.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one practical example for me is we went to the Gold Coast for a family holiday, last school holidays, and there was I spotted
Yeah.
the hidden disability sunflower scheme in the airport, and my son's young,
Yeah.
so I said to him, I said,
Yeah.
look, see, this is a. Do you want it? We can go to the autism room if you like, mate. And he goes, what? What does that mean? You know, I explained it to him, and he goes, oh, sounds amazing. You know, so what we agreed with him, we said, oh, look, do you want to get one of those lanyards, mate? You know, like, yeah, that'd be great, Dad. You know, like, so I think you're right. Some of those grassroots fundamental things like that are so crucial. And I've noticed it even in Woolworths and Coles. You know, I think they've got the quiet hours of shopping and that kind of stuff. You know, it's nice. It's
Mm.
nice to see that happening, isn't it?
Mm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've got, we've worked with, so we've worked with all of the airports,
Mhm.
and we've been supporting the implementation of the sunflower program in those places. And I'm always surprised, just whenever I go anywhere, so many more people are wearing the sunflower lanyards now. So it's absolutely, really taking off. We've been working with stadiums, and so we now, know that. One of the things that stadiums do is put in, quiet spaces and retreat rooms and places where families or autistic people can go if they need a break. And so, it's amazing when you get feedback from a family or an autistic person who says, I went to a rock concert, and I knew I was able to go because I knew that at the stadium there was somewhere that I could go to if I needed to. In fact, I didn't need to go there, but knowing it was there reduced my anxiety to the point that I didn't need it. But then, of course, it is there for families with young children. So, yeah, all of those things are fantastic. And it just means that people are able to access the community, and that's what we want them to do.
Correct, correct. And another quick mention to the Gold Coast was some of the theme parks. They had
Mm.
you could go up
Yeah,
to the services desk and you get assisted
yeah,
with queues. And
yeah,
the overwhelm of that, etc. And it was just like,
yeah,
oh, just lovely.
yeah,
Yeah, very good.
yeah.
Now,
Mm.
I guess kind of shifting into evidence-based stuff. So
Yeah.
it is. There's lots of things you can see online. You can read blogs. You can see social media stuff. Some of it is very left field and not evidence based, and it's people's personal opinions, and it's hard to sift through, what I don't want to say what's real or not, because might be emerging theories and people just don't know what's there yet. But evidence informed practice is, of course, central to what you're doing as an organization. Are there any examples that you could share where evidence informed research has actually reshaped how supports can be delivered?
So yeah, you're right. And we, really underpinning what we do is a real commitment to evidence-based or evidence-informed practice. And so, we're not really interested in research that just sits on a shelf. We want, we're interested in research that informs practice or informs an improvement in how we do things, or, improvement in programs. So we have our own small research team at Aspect, and they're amazing. They absolutely punch above their weight in terms of the work they do, but they also are very connected to national, Australian, other university, bigger universities and international universities and teams, and very in high demand to work in partnership with those other places as well. So what our research team often does is start, if we're interested in developing a particular program or a support, they'll start with some research. And that's really very much about understanding the lived experience of autistic people or families around a particular issue. And that research is always co-designed with autistic people. So we don't decide what the question is that is important. We make sure that we work with autistic people to know what's the question for them that's important to be answered, or what is the issue for them. So an example, a really cool example of this is last year we did well, there was some research that showed that in the area of pregnancy and early parenthood, many autistic people face really significant barriers during pregnancy, during early parenthood, including sensory overload, communication challenges, higher rates of depression and anxiety, and really a lesser experience in terms of maternity care and that process. So we did that research and spoke to autistic people about their experiences, and then based on what we found through that research, we developed a pregnancy and parenthood hub, and on which so it's an online hub, and we've developed a whole lot of resources to support autistic people who might be pregnant or in early parenthood. And then we've worked with healthcare professionals in terms of training and maternity hospitals to roll out that sort. It's really about making those adjustments to the things they were doing so that it's more inclusive and it removes those barriers. So it was just a really cool piece of work. So we start with the research, we find out what the barriers are, then we design the resources, and we find the partnerships in the community to work with to make sure that those resources are used. And they're available for free, and we develop turning into practice.
Wow, that's I love how just intentional the thought process is behind that, and also making it practical, right? I think that you get buy-in when there's pragmatism included. Because it's kind of in the eye of the beholder, it's always what can you do for me, right? So what can you do to solve something that's a real challenge in one's life, right? So very nice, very nice. Okay, so going back to, I guess, the NDIS landscape, I guess people sometimes can freak out with it constantly shifting. And in my opinion, there's always something, whether it be funding periods getting dropped in like a grenade, and you go, oh, or there's always these things that just happen, and the sector is expected to adjust. And sometimes it works for people, sometimes it doesn't. So I'm kind of used to the ever-changing landscape now. I'm okay with it. We definitely have to adapt as individual companies, etc., and providers. But from your vantage point, from Aspect's perspective, what are the biggest opportunities and what are the biggest challenges in the NDIS landscape specifically for those that are working with autistic clients?
Well, I think the challenges far outweigh the opportunities. So well done on staying optimistic about all of that.
Yep.
But I guess, there is always the opportunity to, we know that for many people, the NDIS is life-changing, to be able to get the supports they need. And so the opportunity is always there to provide really, strength-based, neurodiversity affirming, autism-specific supports that really start from, what the person, what their goals are, what they want to, what their outcomes are that they want to achieve. So that opportunity is always there. The challenge in achieving, what we all really want to achieve for our services in the NDIS, and we would like to, workforce is always an issue for us. And then I think in the sector, that capability and understanding around autism can be a challenge as well. And so, I think, and then there's all of the challenges for the participants and their families around funding and packages and identifying providers. So, there is a lot of challenges. But I guess we're all trying to continue to evolve so that we can, provide the supports that we want to provide.
Let me throw a factor in there and see what you think about it. So as a provider, we do currently have a mixture of under 18s and over 18s. And this is me being radically honest. We are now making a strategic decision to primarily focus on adults. And I'm not just talking about autism only, I'm talking about disability provision, right? And the challenge that we see with those that are under 18 is that they're minors, right? And so what that means is that the obvious things that are the elephants in the room, understandably so, and I get it all, is that, there can be extra dimensions that are required to you need to fulfill around having the course consistency is important, but there can be a lack of appreciation for, or someone can be sick, someone can be on holiday, therefore it can't always be Bob or Susan, the support worker. So that kind of that rigidity thing can be a problem, and then that can lead down to relationships ending from a provision point of view because an adult has got the more maturity to go, okay, I can appreciate that I might need to have a team of 2 or 3 workers, right? So it's kind of like the irony from a funding and also logistics perspective is that you've got all these extra requirements that are kind of be a bit more unstable because again, we're dealing with a child, right? And again, as a parent, if my son was to go, I don't like Bob, I don't like Susan, then they're gone. They're gone as a support worker. So there's all this kind of instability, if that makes sense. Just thinking about the rostering of things, it's a harder challenge to rise to, right? But then the irony amongst all of that is typically because of the parental responsibility principle of like, hey, you're the parent, so primarily you're the one doing the day-to-day supports informally. What it means is usually rubbish core budgets. Like you tend to have decent capacity building budgets. And like my son's got that, which is great. And I genuinely appreciate that. It's great that we can go to the OT. It's great that we can go to the speech pathologist or psychologist or whatever we need to do. But for those families that are dealing with like very intense situations and the parents are probably at risk of care burnout, that's the problem I see. I go, well, we're dealing with child, we're dealing with extra requirements with usually a pretty rubbish budget because they're under 18. It's the parental responsibility thing. It feels like a really hard thing to resolve. And I get that there are definitely autistic suited organizations that are very good at that. And we do always try our best ourselves. But those are factors that are really hard to marry together, if that makes sense. What do you think of that? Because I'm very open to any wisdom you've got.
Yeah, look, I think you're right, and I think if we put sort of children and adults, because I think for some autistic adults, some of those things you've identified are just as challenging for autistics and whatever. I mean, what we see as an autism specific provider is, we often provide services for people with very complex needs, a lot of co-occurring conditions. And what we see is that some of the smaller providers, as you say, you're making choices around adults versus children. Other providers make choices about people with complex needs, participants, with co-occurring conditions because they don't have the expertise or the experience or the resources in the plans aren't sufficient to provide for the participants' needs. So, we see that we do, and other sort of bigger providers often do some of that heavy lifting in terms of really providing services. And we want to do that too. We see that that's our job. One of the challenges in the NDIS is that historically there's no differentiation in terms of the funding that, the price points that are available to people like providers or for people with very complex needs versus people with perhaps easier, not easy is not the right word, I don't want to say that, but less complex needs. And so so what we see is that smaller providers may choose not to provide services, and so then as a proportion we have more of those people, which puts more burden on our resources and what we do. So it's an interesting space, and we're watching as the changes around registration come through, and the NDIS is doing a quality therapy pilot this year with and we're part of that, and so hopefully that will create some understanding of what the resources, what is required, that difference between providers and what they provide.
Absolutely. And then maybe there's a little bit of difference, as you say, between larger organizations and also not-for-profits. So you can have
Mm,
a mission-focused,
yeah,
direction. Of
yeah.
course, a private entity can do that as well. But then the screaming thing is kind of like, oh, you've got to do so much extra with fewer resources and lower budgets. So it becomes for a private, smaller organization, unless that's particularly a passion or a specialist skill set of yours. I don't know if this is a general comment for, I suppose, for any complex client. When it's complex client with, not much, not a small budget, basically, it's do so much extra for, that. And
Mhm.
I think it's not, this is not just an autism specific thing. It's a broad NDIS problem, isn't it? Yeah, of differentiation and budget relativity.
The mindset of not for profit. Our mindset
Mm.
is if we're for purpose or purpose,
Yes.
because um, in terms of NDIS, we can't continue. We don't have a never-ending piggy bank. We have to make ends meet, and so so it's very challenging, as it is for all providers. I understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so then amongst all these challenges, if you could wave your magic wand and I'm going to put you on the spot here, you have to fix one thing, right? One thing
Okay.
only.
Yeah.
Here's the soundbite. No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
What would that be, one systemic issue for autism specific support and the ecosystem, that exists or needs to
Yeah.
exist?
You've already touched on it. You headlined it up the front. I think it's that the ecosystem of foundational supports as well as intensive one-to-one supports. I think, as I said earlier, we've seen that through the NDIS, there's sort of created this vacuum of family supports for children to be part of their local childcare and their play group. Those things were in place, when I was a parent of a young child. All of that was available, and it's much less available now. So I think, and what that puts so much pressure onto the NDIS to be everything. And so I think potentially we can be slightly optimistic that someone is trying to wave that magic wand and think about foundational supports. There's obviously a lot of work to be done, and I'm sure they're not going to get it right overnight.
Mm,
But I think the foundational supports for young children, under thriving kids, but then also foundational supports when they come further down the line for older
mm,
people as well is
mm,
just a really important thing. And if they were in place, that support people in the community, in mainstream services, then it just will take take pressure off the NDIS, and I think it will make for a better ecosystem.
I hope so. I mean, and again, if I'm sorry to be cynical for a second, but I hope it's not just pushing around chairs in the Titanic.
Yeah,
And I
so
say
do
that
I.
phrase in jest. I say
Yeah,
it in jest, but if
yeah.
we've got certain problems here in the NDIS, we don't just
Mm.
like shove it across here and go, oh well, we'll try and do it this way.
No,
There you go, states.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
yeah, we'll find out,
yeah.
I suppose. Um,
We will. And look, and the cynical part of me also, obviously there is a financial element to this.
yeah.
But I mean, I can see that if it's done properly, then potentially there is money to be saved
Mm,
there. But I think for me, it's the financial bit isn't the reason to do it. It's so that people have the services that they need, and it's about those sort of wraparound services.
mm,
It's not just all about having to get a package and get yourself some, individualized. Absolutely, though, people, and many autistic people will need individualized services, and autism is a lifelong disability. And so, for many autistic individuals, the NDIS will also always be really important for them to
mm.
achieve what they want to achieve and need to
Yeah,
achieve, what
yeah.
they have a right to achieve in their life.
Yeah, yeah, okay, okay. Let's make some distinctions for some terminology for a second. You got the word accommodations, right? So you could make an example of an accommodation could be trying to be aware of sensory environments and making it. My son, for example, gets accommodations in school where if he needs a break, it was really beautiful. Like when he was super young at kindy, they had a teepee for him and it's gorgeous. Like, if you
Mm.
needed a sensory break, go to the teepee. And I was like, oh my God, they're breaking my heart. That's gorgeous. So that's an example of an accommodation, right? And that is definitely relevant at all levels and ages, etc. But in parallel to that, there's the concept of neuroaffirming practices. So outside of
Mm.
just accommodations, so to speak, what are some of the practical steps that any autism specialist organizations can do to truly embrace neuroaffirming practices?
Yeah. And I guess, if you can, the more you can have neuroaffirming practices, potentially for some people, the less accommodations and adjustments they will need, because neuroaffirming practices, in fact, will meet, the needs, or, will help to help people to be included. So I guess I guess the starting point is, working with neurodivergent people themselves and starting with understanding language, sensory, all it's from the perspective of someone with lived experience of autism or neurodivergent. What is the impact of what you're doing and saying on them? So, because that's the feedback you need to understand what it is you might need to change. And so, really at the core, that's that universal design. If you can design something from the starting point, so it's about, what is the language that you are using? It can be very specifically about, what is the language you're using to describe what you're doing? What is the language you're using around, what you're with that person? And it can also be about, well, so then what are the assumptions you're making about the environment? What are the assumptions you're making about the expectations that you have versus the expectations that the person, that the neurodivergent or autistic person might have. So I think, those are the things, and it is coming from that strength-based approach. So it's not all about, well, what people can't do and what the deficits are and what the things that have to be fixed. It's about, okay, so where is the starting point for this person or this, for what you're trying to do, and then how are you going to reach that next place, and working with that person about how you're going to do that.
Yeah, let me throw in two real life stories from me as well that I think could speak to that. And so if I even think about my relationship with my own wife, the last two years of me having my diagnosis, I think about things like, she might, in moments of frustration on her side, she might go, "You're obsessing on fill in the blank,"
Yeah,
right? Whatever it is,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
That to me, and we have conversations about this in a beautiful way because she's a very beautiful, conscious, wonderful, wonderful woman. I'll say, look, babe, I'm not obsessing. When you say if I'm obsessing, that makes me feel, whoa, that's rejection. That's like, no, 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 no. I'm not obsessing. My experience is that I have a sharp intellect and I'm focusing. I wouldn't use obsessing. I'm focusing on that specific detail. And my mind is in a hyper focus right now and cannot move on until we've addressed that genuine question. Because I think one of the real lived experience things for me is that when I'm focusing on that particular point, I intellectually don't want to move on until the person's actually answered the bloody question. And my experience of the world is that I'm like, no, but answer the question. I find that people dance around it. And I think that there's all these labels of like, oh, you're obsessing, oh, you're just whatever, and that's a great real life example of me of like, if someone can have awareness of what it is like, then even if that's not their experience of the world, they'll try to maybe avoid, putting a label onto it, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And look, I think, and autistic people and adults, they're really the key to point out to us where we're going wrong, or where we can improve in terms of neurodiversity improving. So another example is, back in the day when I started, was called early intervention. Children went to early intervention, and now adults said to us, have said to us, well, that as they grow up has made them feel, well, what are we, intervention, is it like there's something we have to intervene, an intervention is something we're trying to change. And so that aspect we call it's early childhood supports is what we do, has come from autistic people telling us, and being, well, it's just actually not very neuroaffirming to talk about intervention, because that's really, the assumption there is that there's something wrong that you need to change.
And I also want to add in another one. So this is good. This feels real to me. I would use the word autistic. I am autistic, right? That to me is a fundamental makeup of the way I see the world, the way my mind works. It's the makeup of who I am, right? And I now accept that and embrace it. And I think there's some great things on social media where people will make distinctions around that they don't have autism, right? Because if you have autism, it makes it sound like it's a disease. It's not a freaking disease. It's a difference, right? I suppose actually a different brilliant. There you go. I'll link into your purpose there, right? It is a different brilliant. That's how it feels like to me. So yeah, I say autistic. That's what I say. I try to avoid even the terms ASD, because again, the DSM, the diagnostic manual will say, ASD 1, 2, 3. And sure, I'm ASD 1, technically speaking. So my son is 2, right? And I get that 3 can have additional challenges. But it's a weird world we live in now where we've got to try and marry together being genuine about describing someone's needs. So you can't tiptoe around it and not actually describe the support needs. You do have to say, this or that. So it has to be real and descriptive and objective. But yeah, I agree. At the same time, even the term, disorder, like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm ASD1 that I have a bit of I don't know. I'm 42 going on 43, and I kind of feel like I've lived my whole life, and sure, I felt a bit different. I've even had to come to the terms with the term disability there, because in certain times I don't see it that way at all. I see it as a form of brilliance. But to be honest, Jackie, there are absolutely humbling moments where I go, no, I'm not coping. So it's disabling, for me. And I'm not trying to nitpick around language here, but I'm just relating to you about, you're absolutely right. So spot on, the importance of perspective and language, etc. Right?
I don't want to. It's so complex, and this is actually a minefield, and we play in this minefield, and we are often, we're often engaging in very robust dialogue around this. So one of the things is, so certainly, ASD as a diagnosis, part of the DSM. So we have an autism assessment diagnosis team, and, that's where that term belongs.
Yep.
We also, there is within families who have young children with, very complex needs. And in terms of talking about the fact that autism isn't a disability, we need to be very sensitive, because for those families, what they're experiencing, their life, and understanding their children, helping their children to cope with the world and all of the sensory and support early communication. That conversation about, well, autism isn't a disability, I mean, that is alien to those people. And there is a movement within autism at the moment where people are talking, wanting to introduce the term profound autism, because people who have very deep, complex needs sometimes feel that the conversation isn't about them anymore. So we have to be very sensitive to that. So yeah, it's very complex. And one of the things about being around for so long is I've been through, when I first started in autism, we talked about autistic people, and then that became not right, and we talked about people with autism, and then
Right.
we moved to people on the autism spectrum, and now most people are back to being autistic
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
So what we do at Aspect is be very respectful of what people want and how they
Yes.
describe. So
Yes.
we generally talk about autistic individuals,
Mhm.
but for families with very young children,
Mm.
sometimes they're they're on their journey of understanding. And so, we talk about children on the autism spectrum sometimes, and families of young children prefer that. So language is it's an important thing, and it's, can be really sensitive, and yeah, we're very aware of.
Yeah, of all of those factors. And you said it so beautifully. And by the way, I'm not making a claim that it isn't a disability. I don't claim to represent a cohort. I'm just speaking my own individual perspective. As I guess I fit in, if there are boxes, I would fit in the box of late diagnosed, didn't have a clue, 80s kid born, and here I am, da-da. There's so many different cohorts, I suppose, and they will all have individual perspectives. And I absolutely agree that there's many different factors that are disabling, whether it be self-harm or sensory need issues. Yeah, I get it. Trust me, I get it. It's lived. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you're right. You got to, this is what I mean by, like, you do have to. You have to describe what's the phrase? It does what it says in the tin. You have to describe things as they are, and also be sensitive and kind and loving and all that stuff. It's just it's a minefield. It's a minefield. Okay, cool. Thank you. I suppose, like, a couple of final questions would be, as people transition, right, it's from different stages of life. That's a key thing, isn't it? Moving from, say,
Mhm.
school to adulthood. It
Mm.
can be painful for autistic individuals and their families. Yeah, how is Aspect innovating, or partnering with, parents and educational organizations to help that transition?
Mm. Yeah, you're right. That can be a real, sometimes people describe leaving school as just falling off a cliff. School with its routines and notwithstanding that many autistic people, don't enjoy school and have all sorts of issues with school, for some, there's that routine, predictability, 5 days a week, and all of a sudden that doesn't exist anymore. So it can be really difficult. We, with the students that we have from about year 9, year 10 through to year 11 and 12, we have a real focus on work skills, employment readiness sort of programs. And we're really lucky to have some absolutely amazing philanthropic partners who support us with job skills and work readiness programs. So our schools will work in partnership, and I guess it comes back to a different brilliance. So we start with the interests and the motivations of our students, and what is it that they're interested in, and how can we connect their interest into something. And so for many of our students, they will spend, in those last couple of years of school, they'll spend a day a week or sometimes more with and supported by a teacher, or supported by a teacher's assistant, working in in their local community somewhere, to really start to put in place those skills that they might need, gradually over a few years, because that sudden leave school and start work just
Mm,
doesn't work for many of our students. The other thing, some of our schools have coffee vans.
okay.
And so our students do the barista courses, and whenever I go and visit the school, the students make me a coffee from the coffee van, and I'd say over the years, some of them have got pretty good at it. But those coffee vans, they often will take out into the community, and so it's just about trying to find some of those skills that will help the students that are really, of interest to them. That's just really important. The other thing we do increasingly, is because it is about partnering with TAFEs, partnering with universities to make campuses and TAFEs more autism friendly, to help TAFE teachers understand about autism and how they can accommodate or make adjustments that, will help autistic young people to be successful. And then, the other thing for some of our students who leave school, actually it's community, and through NDIS programs, we do sort of programs of support, things like gardening, things like all sorts of things. Depending on their interests, we will sort of run programs, and people can use their NDIS funding to come to those programs, cooking, shopping, fitness, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah, nice. So of course, yeah, it has to align to interest, because I know that from my own experience of life, and I think of my son, like if he's not interested, it ain't going to happen. So with everything he's just said, and linking into the NDIS, if someone does have an NDIS plan and they've got school leaver employment supports, which is commonly referred to as SLES, in your opinion, for autism specific supports, is the structure of the way that typical SLES funding, is that correctly designed for autistic individuals, or is it missing out duration or certain scope of things, etc.?
I actually am not sure that I can answer that. We at Aspect ceased doing SLES programs a few years ago, so we don't do them anymore. Certainly when we did them, we did tailor them specifically around autism. So I guess my comment would be that any SLES program, if it's for autistic people, absolutely needs to be tailored. There has to be a good understanding of autism, and there needs to be some autism specificity around that program. But my experience isn't enough with SLES programs overall to really be able to properly. I wouldn't like to have a stab at that question.
No, that's okay. I'll put you on the spot there. I think that any SLES program, I'm not a SLES provider either, and I don't really have the depth of that. But I think that it's one of those things where it's very important that any good quality SLES provider is not just doing a tick and flick, so to speak. They're not just going, yeah, we'll take that money and we'll do that, and we'll but you could very easily be cynical about that. But that, again, comes down to the individual quality of the individual provider that you're working with, right? Yeah.
Speaks to everything, really, that whatever you're doing, whichever program, whether it's NDIS funded or whatever, tick and flick or just, create a program and expect people to fit in is not going to work for many autistic people. We really need to come from the perspective of the individual and build that program. That's the way to make it successful.
That's one of the most beautiful, biggest things I've got out of this conversation, right? Co-design, coming from the point of view of the individual, of course, having a neurodiverse affirming perspective on things and having that actual genuine knowledge. Thank you, Jackie. It's been really, really insightful. It's great to know the type of things, that the broadness and the depth of everything that Aspects is doing. That really gives me a new appreciation for that. So thank you very much for the podcast today and for the conversation.
I don't want to have given the impression that, for small providers, that there's small things you can do in terms of that. So but it is just coming from that mindset of, well, just in small ways, how can I talk to autistic people, understand their experience, think about what I'm doing from their perspective. So it's not a whole thing that you have to redesign your whole program. But there is some small steps that you can make to improve.
Exactly. Fantastic. Well, Jackie Borlandon from Aspect, thank you so much again today. We'll wrap it up here, but this has been the Steadway NDIS podcast. My name is Chris Hall, your host, and please like, comment, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff. And Jackie, I look forward to hopefully meeting you in person at some point soon. And I hope you have a great weekend ahead.